Henry Miyatake was born in Seattle in 1929, the youngest of 3 children. He grew up in the family's grocery store. After EO 9066 was signed, his family was incarcerated at the Puyallup Detention Center before being moved to the Minidoka concentration camp in Idaho, along with over 13,000 Japanese Americans from the Pacific Northwest. At Minidoka, he worked on the camp's electrical crew and was among those who did farm labor outside the camp during harvest season. As a teenager, at Hunt High School in Minidoka, Idaho, his civics teacher introduced Henry to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Ms. Ammerman felt her mission was to teach us American democratic practices right down the line, even though we were inside the camp. And she happened to be my civics teacher, and she did a good job on teaching us, the Constitution of the United States and how the government works and all this kind of stuff. And in fact, she did such a good job that I took it upon myself to really read the Constitution, because here was something that Gordon Hirabashi had tried to exercise in 1942, and he went to jail for it, and he makes a presentation to us in the freshman class, and here I'm reading this thing in the actual verse and trying to interpret it. And I say to myself, well, they have the Bill of Rights, they have all these guarantees, and as a result of this kind of indoctrination, which I got from Ms. Ammerman, I turned around and in my term paper, I used all that process that I had been exposed to. And my term paper was American Democracy, What It Means to Me. And it was a collection of all my frustrations about being in the camp and all the things that really caused me concern about what was happening to us. And Miss Ammerman called me one day after class and said she can't accept this paper. And so I said, well, I don't think I did anything wrong, and I think I was within the context of what you asked for in the term paper. And she said, well, unless you rewrite it, I'm not going to accept it. I waited till Tuesday. I went back to class Monday, and Tuesday I went back there and I told her, no, I'm not going to rewrite it. I said the Constitution of the United States has one of the precepts of the freedom of the press, and that's one of the things that is in the 4 freedoms that Roosevelt is talking about, that's why we're fighting World War II, all this kind of crap. Well, what a bunch of dialogue that was. And she says, I'm sorry to hear that, I'm gonna have to take steps with the principal.
After being released from camp, Henry returned to Seattle. He eventually got a job for the Federal Aviation Administration in Alaska in 1948 and joined the Army Reserves. He saw active duty during the Korean War, doing sound surveillance work, and taught sound surveillance for the Counterintelligence Corps. After the war, he got his degree from the University of Washington and worked as an engineer for Boeing. In the 1960s, he began to study the wartime incarceration and think about how Japanese Americans might seek redress for what had been done to them by their own government. Miyatake researched the federal code in 1975 and discovered that EO 9066 was still on the books. Through political connections, he got the issue to the White House, and President Ford used language drafted by Henry to revoke the executive order on February 19, 1976. Without his vision of petitioning for redress of grievances, the government would have never rescinded EO 9066. In 1978, he was part of the Evacuation Redress Committee of the Japanese American Citizens League chapter in Seattle and helped organize the first ever Day of Remembrance, a 2.5-mile car caravan to the former Puyallup Detention Center to commemorate the incarceration. It was the largest gathering of Japanese Americans in one place since the end of World War II.
I thought, after the fact, I thought that it was a tremendous success on getting the community together. And some of the people would say, you know, that was the first time I ever talked to my children about the camps when we were driving on the caravan down to Puyallup, you know. And so it was coming out of the closet for some of these guys, you know. To me, that was not the case because, you know, I'll talk to my kids about all this kind of stuff. Mike's legislative aide asked us for a draft of the bill. And so Shosuke took it upon himself to draft all the attributes of the Seattle Plan into a draft bill. And he did his homework. He got documents about how to write a bill in Congress and all the rudimentary stuff what entails a bill to be drafted. And he went through a lot of homework doing this kind of stuff. And he did put a draft together which encompassed all the things that we wanted to do. And this was given to Mike Lowry's aide, and in turn it went to Washington, D.C.
In November 1979, Congressman Mike Lowry introduced the first redress bill for over 120,000 people who were unjustly incarcerated. Miyatake's plan was the basis for that bill. He called for individual reparation payments for all that were forcibly removed and incarcerated. Bob Shimabukuro, author of the book Born in Seattle, The Campaign for Japanese American Redress, wrote in the program for Miyatake's memorial. Henry was not there when President Ford signed his An American Promise. He was not in the photo when President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act. But neither of those turning points that fundamentally changed our history would have been imaginable without the dogged persistence, the selfless commitment, and the unassuming courage of Henry Miyatake.